Hey, good evening, and well, good evening for me. It might be any time for you, but whatever time it is, greetings. It's GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we continued our World of Warcraft Classic playthrough by creating a fictional night elf character from the Shadow Song clan line with old Maev and Jared that we've read about. And we did the quests in Shadowglen, the starting Night Elf little hub. We've also been dipping our toes into some lore on the Dungeons & Dragons World of Warcraft campaign setting. And we are now in the 4th chapter of Lands of Mystery, which is the second book in this sort of series by Bran Bronzebeard that discusses the land of Azeroth and how it looks and how it was envisioned to the creators of Warcraft and the people that they gave permission to make this kind of spin-off at the time. We last looked at the Eye, which is kind of what the bottom of the Maelstrom Nazjatar, how that was sort of percolating. Stay a while and listen now as we take it to a land that is more familiar to many of us, the Isle of, I always don't know if this should be pronounced Kezan or Kezan. I'm going to say Kezan. I like that better. Kezan, which is the Goblin home isle. I believe once Cataclysm comes about, this isle is sort of like sunk or something. It's not really, it's not in existence anymore. The capital is Undermine. I don't know if that remains the capital. It doesn't sound familiar to me. And the capital is certainly not like an underground mine the way the Undercity is a capital. But it's a big capital, 20,000. That's larger than most of the capitals that we have. And its overall population is 40,000. Predominantly goblin, but with some trolls and a smattering of humans, gnomes, horde trolls, high elves, dwarves, night elves, orcs, and tauren. Just a little bit of everyone is present here. It's a corporation. They believe in voodoo. Interesting. Okay, so let's, and this is an independent island. They haven't joined the horde yet. Goblins are in charge on the Isle of Kezan, making the whole place a swarming cesspool of corruption, chaos, scheming, and invention. Several cities exist on Kezan, including the nefarious Undermine, the de facto capital of the Goblins' trade empire. Kezan is a tropical island, and palm trees and other greenery appear in profusion. Kezan's many ports bustle day and night as merchant ships approach and depart, carrying goods of all sorts to places of all sorts for people of all sorts. Kezan is a valuable way station between the eastern and western lands, and almost all travelers stop here, whether traveling by ship or griffin, or more esoteric means. I don't know if you can travel by griffin that far. The island is the heart of the Goblins' mercantile efforts, pumping trade throughout Azeroth. Kezan is the largest and southernmost of the South Sea Islands, and despite the Goblin presence, the safest. Some of that, I think, changes. Unlike the surrounding islands, Kezan's inhabitants won't try to kill you on sight. Rather, they first attempt to take your money and all your worldly possessions, then leave you to die on the rain-soaked cobblestone streets. Perhaps I'm being unfair. Kezan's ports are valuable, neutral areas for both the Alliance and the Horde, and if not for the Goblins, trade would grind to a standstill, and I wouldn't find adventurer shops in ridiculous places like Stranglethorn Vale. Still, I was on the receiving end of one too many Goblin explosions in the Second War, and old grudges die hard. People and culture. Goblins are short and green, and they don't laugh. They cackle. They wear leather clothing, often cut into aprons to protect themselves from the caustic fluids they handle. Their entire culture is apparently focused on mercantile enterprises, and they work hard to expand their markets in any way possible. Most goblins seem friendly but insane. Goblins can be cutthroat merchants, and this ruthlessness is more prevalent on Kezan than anywhere else, probably because the goblins are competing against their own kind. While goblins answer to no king or other such titular head, a collection of trade princes rules their merchant empire, which is called the Trade Coalition. Officially, 5 trade princes exist, though I wouldn't be surprised if there were 1 or 2 more lurking about in the shadows. The goblins certainly don't elect their trade princes, nor are the positions hereditary. The trade princes killed, blackmailed, and schemed their way to the top, like in the short story we read. Together, these 5 goblins make the mercantile machine run, organizing the extensive and complex trade fleets. The trade coalition is huge, far-reaching, and massively complicated. In addition, numerous other smaller goblin companies created and run by entrepreneurs called moguls operate throughout Azeroth. Perhaps the most famous of these smaller businesses is the Venture Company, founded and ruled by mogul Razdunk. Goblins engage in any activity that earns them a profit. They traffic in legitimate dealings, including food, spices, and textiles, as well as more esoteric and questionable wares such as magic items and arms dealing. Goblins have no respect for nature and engage in deforestation and mining on vast scales. The Venture Company is particularly notorious for such activities. In addition, goblins run morally corrupt businesses such as smuggling and slave trading. While the Trade Coalition condones all such activities, goblin smugglers and slavers prefer to maintain low profiles for obvious reasons. Goblins are mad, but brilliant. Their technology is just as ingenious, if usually more volatile, than gnomish inventions. Goblins are also the best alchemists around, with the possible exception of the Forsaken. Goblin tinkers and alchemists are found throughout Kezan. As chaotic as it is, goblin society does have some order to it. Goblin barons serve as magistrates to run the trade prince's lands and holdings, and goblin captains command vessels for the trade fleets or for private merchants. Kezan was my first stop in the South Seas. I stabled Griffin with the most reputable facility I could find. My time in Kezan was exciting, though not in the way I normally like. Every city on the island is a bit like Ratchet on a larger scale. I always felt like I had to watch my back and count my change. So let's have an explanation of the purple-skinned goblin giants by alchemist Zovzik. Zovzik says, Master Dwarf, first you have to understand that we goblins are the best alchemists in the world. We've come up with all kinds of interesting potions. They can cure your wounds, make you smarter, or make your beard grow long and luxurious. One of our masterpieces produced those fellows you saw wandering around outside, those purple-skinned guys. We call them hobgoblins. They were originally goblins, of course, but now they're bigger, stronger, and much stupider. They aren't so good at thinking about things, but they make great shock troops. We don't have to feel bad about sending them into battle on the front lines because they have a life expectancy of only 3 years anyway. Me, Bronzebeard. But isn't there a moral question involved when you turn members of your own race into such grotesque monstrosities? Zovzik gives me a blank look. I do think we have, I don't know what they're called. Are they called hobgoblins? But there's the bruisers or whatever that you do encounter with a lot of goblin type quests. Now, maybe that's what we're referring to, but they're not necessarily purple skinned. Geography. Kezan is a tropical island, and the associated flora and fauna appear in the wilderness between cities. Palm trees are everywhere, and in the wild places I found tasty fruits and flowers the size of my head. I also ran into many tropical animals, including tigers and lots of bugs. Kezan has several natural bays, and the goblins have constructed at least small port towns in most of them. As you travel south, the elevation rises. Southern Kezan is volcanic, and several volcanoes constantly ooze lava into the ocean. Lava tubes and other geological tunnels and caves riddle the island. Mount Kajaro. Mount Kajaro is the most recognizable mountain on the island and is a landmark for ships and flying travelers. It is a volcano and still active. Kajaro is sacred to Kezan's jungle trolls, and it is their last holdout on the island. They have one small settlement near the mountain, Vudris Village. Kajaro's volcanic and tectonic activity created the tunnels that house Undermine. I do think Mount Kajaro and the trolls that are kind of near it are part of the Kazan questline in the beginning. Sites and settlements. Goblins control just about everything on Kezan. You'll leave with less gold than you had when you came. There's Bilgewater Port, which is a city of 14,000, so this is pretty much the main Bilgewater. It sounds like it's the main one. Bilgewater Port, or I guess not counting Undermine, on a bay on the island's northwest coast is Kezan's primary port city. It bustles at all hours with ships arriving and departing in perpetuity. Cranes load and unload, sailors embark and disembark. The docks are noisy and crowded, with visiting races rubbing shoulders with the native goblins and the goblin merchant sailors who arrive to drop off and or pick up their goods. Bilgewater is the port in the South Seas and the only one worth mentioning that exists between the western and eastern continents. As such, it sees a lot of activity, and races of all types are found here. Bilgewater is connected to goblin enterprises all over the world and is linked directly to Undermine. A circle of goblins is called the Bilgewater Cartel oversees operations here. And let's read a little bit more about the kind of stats of Bilgewater Port. I don't care about the feats and all that, but the description says, whatever you're looking for, you can find it in Bilgewater Port. The waterfront boasts inns, taverns, gambling halls, theaters, pleasure houses, and numerous other businesses that cater to sailors and visitors. Deeper in the city, small shops of every kind fight for space on the cobblestone streets. Edge is a large town of 4,000. This much smaller cousin to Bilgewater Port is on the opposite side of the island. A pirate group called the Blackwater Raiders runs the town, and Edge has a secluded port that primarily serves the raiders and their allies. Despite the fact that they're pirates, the Blackwater Raiders aren't really bad guys, at least not when you compare them to the Scourge and the Burning Legion. They're less interested in plunder and more interested in securing mercantile deals and widening the circle of ports with which they can trade. A goblin called Baron Revelgaz, based in Booty Bay in southern Azeroth, rules the Blackwater Raiders and thus is technically in charge of Edge. The Trade Coalition has little influence over Revelgaz, and indeed the Raiders attempt to go under, above, or around the Coalition's head. The port in this town is largely for goods the pirates don't want the Coalition to know about, contraband and especially pricey stuff like magic items and political prisoners. For normal trade items, they go through Bilgewater like everyone else. Vudress Village. Located near Mount Kajara, Vudress Village is the only troll settlement left on Kezan. The trolls once controlled much more of the island, but the goblins battled them for control, and over time technological advancements gave them the edge. The goblins leave the trolls mostly alone now, and despite their old war, the goblins show no signs of an expansionist or imperialist mindset. They haven't attempted to conquer Zandalar, for example. The goblins seem content to focus on mercantile concerns. I don't know if they could succeed in conquering Zandalar. The Undermine. This is a pretty big civilian community. Big population. The population seems to be like roughly half of the half of the island is in Undermine. And it has lots of little stats and stuff that we're not going to get to. But no faith, corporate. They're ruled by the trade princes. Undermine is the center of goblin civilization. Here we have a cool picture too of like a shredder guard and a tech knight maybe. It is located beneath and within Kezan and is connected to the island via a series of volcanic tunnels. The main centers of Undermine are in the volcanic caverns beneath Kezan. Secondary island caverns exist farther away, and the goblins have constructed tunnels of thick glass that lead to these smaller areas. Passing through these tubes means walking along the ocean's floor and looking out to see the colorful fish and hungry sharks nearby. Weird. As the capital of goblin culture, Undermine teems with chaotic activity. Goblin alchemists and tinkerers practice their crafts and set off explosions. Slave markets bustle in out-of-the-way places. Shops and businesses of all kinds are based here, and the headquarters of the Trade Coalition, the Venture Company, and myriad other enterprises are within this city. In Undermine, you can find the extremes on both ends, wreaking slave pens in one area, the trade princes' lavish palaces in another. Of particular interest is the fact that wandering around Undermine, I saw a strange breed of creature I'd never seen before. They resembled goblins, but they were much taller and had purple skin. That's the thing we read about in the first page. I introduced myself to one such individual. It stared at me in confusion for a moment, then said, "See Zovzik." It jerked a thumb at a nearby alchemist shop. Apparently these purple-skinned creatures aren't too bright. I stopped in at the shop and met Zovzik. He was thrilled that I took notes on his explanation and repeated himself numerous times to make sure I got it right. I included his diatribe off to the side there, yeah. And here's Mogul Razdunk, It was a Tinker Techno Mage. Okay, so it was one of the moguls that like kind of like those aren't as high as the trade princes, but they're like the next level. Here's a description. A large suit of steam armor looms threateningly, its mithril construction speaking of sharpness and speed rather than elegance. A long mithril and wood rifle, its barrel the size of a human head, replaces its left arm. Its right hand is a huge distorted claw fist, and above it on the arm sits a perforated iron nozzle projecting from a dragon's mouth. Arcing over the contraption's back like spider legs are two spindly arms. One ends in a pair of scissor-like blades, while the other ends in a circular saw that whines as it spins. The pilot, a goblin with a mad grin, is visible through a rectangular window in the thing's front. The goblin's hands dart among a bewildering array of levers, buttons, and hanging chains. Razdunk's steam armor is legendary on Kezan, and he prefers to intimidate and threaten his opponent into submission rather than actually attack them. When forced into combat, Razdunk begins by using his Architect Connection ability to imbue Frost Nova into his long rifle, opening a small hatch in the armor's side to touch the weapon, then blasts away with it. After this tactic, he takes great joy in all of his armor's weapons flailing away with the rifle, Dragonmouth, Steam Fist, and Slicers. If Razdunk is having problems hitting his opponents, he calms down enough to make single attacks with his Steam Fist. If the battle looks grim, he attempts to escape with the help of invisibility. Razdunk's familiar is a toad named Bernard. History. As far as I know, no particularly noteworthy events have happened in Kezan. The goblins created, undermined, and beat up the trolls pretty bad. Since that time, they've ranged out and allowed people of all races to buy silly merchandise at exorbitant prices. They allied themselves to the Horde in the Second War because the orcs paid and or intimidated them. But in the Third War, they were a neutral force making money off every side. Adventurers, goblins always scheme. Lizard skin. The goblin mogul Ryzor discovers that thunder lizard hide makes excellent coverings for cannons. They protect them from weather conditions and from overheating. Thinking to capitalize on this discovery, he gathers a group of goblin employees in an adventuring group to head into central Kalimdor to harvest some lizard hides. Unfortunately, Ryzor's apprentice Bibbs betrays his master, takes a group of loyal employees, and also heads toward the lizards, hiring a band of horde adventurers in the process. The PC's job is to beat this other force to the lizards, fight off the rival adventurers, kill the thunder lizards, and safely transport their hides to Bilgewater Port. This task is made especially difficult because a baron from the Trade Coalition learns of this plan and hires a group of ex-Blackwater raiders to attack the trade ships as they travel back to Kezan with the hides. Alright, so I think obviously there's a lot of change coming to the way that Kezan is. I don't even know if Kezan was in any of the games. It might have been mentioned in Warcraft 3. But other than that, there's not, I don't think you do any quests there unless I'm forgetting something. And it changes a lot in Cataclysm because Undermine is not where things happen. Not that I don't think that's what the town was called. But there is a lot of things that did make it through, notably Bilgewater Port does exist. So does Mount Kajaro. The fact that there are trolls sharing this island, the fact that it's a techno jungle kind of area, all of those things are there. All right, cool. I thank you everyone so much for bearing with me. I know the audio needs noise reduction, and I am getting on that, and I know that it can be distracting. It's distracting for me. I don't know if it is for anybody else, but I'm sure it is. It makes the audio not sound crystal clear, but when the dog is in his frisky mode here, walking around, and my floors are like wood panel floors, so it just clicks around. So I'm aware. I apologize. I thank you for bearing through, but I hope that you enjoyed this little side journey into goblin lore and weird side semi-canon type material for World of Warcraft. All right, this one's in the pipe 5x5, and I thank everyone so much for watching and listening. See you next time on Lore of Warcraft.